Hello everyone. So this is part 4 of Oppenheimer, Destroyer of Worlds. Before we get started, I have a very important question. When you drink coffee, do you put cream in your coffee? I do. You know what cream I've been using lately? Heavy whipping cream. I gotta say, it's pretty delicious. I don't know why. Oh, yeah, I do. I went to Original Pancake House, and they use that. Just a little different taste. It's Saturday morning, 9:31, and I have this much remaining from my pot of coffee, and I already drank a pot this morning. So, whew, I am tired, unfortunately. So, let's get into the video.
Despite the reservations expressed by Oppenheimer and many others, the Cold War was heading into the era of mutually assured destruction. As much as he had been absolutely central to the Manhattan Project, and a senior government...
It's George Marshall. Look at that. What a call. Oh, good call, Kris. And these other people, that's Did you get all those names? Oh, my mic accidentally cut out. Back to the video.
scientist for many years, Oppenheimer fell foul of the government in the early 1950s during the Second Red Scare. These were years when the Cold War with the Soviet Union was deepening, following the division of Germany into a Western-aligned West Germany and a communist East Germany, along with the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Warsaw Pact as a rival military alliance, while the Korean War pitted the Western and communist blocs against each other for the first time in a major proxy war. In this environment, America became racked with what were initially legitimate concerns about communist organizations within the United States, acting as a fifth column for the Soviet Union within America. But this soon gave way to intense and unfounded paranoia about the motives of anyone associated with socialist politics, or even groups such as the American Civil Liberties Union. The Second Red Scare, which is termed as such to distinguish it from the First Red Scare, which struck America in the late 1910s following the Russian Revolution of 1917, gathered pace from the late 1940s and was at its most intense between 1950 and 1954, as Senator Joseph McCarthy undertook extensive efforts to identify and bring to trial anyone even remotely suspected of communist sympathies.
I think what they meant to say about McCarthy was he had a problem with communists, and then if you had anything negative to say, like, okay, come on, this is getting stupid, you're a communist, and then he tried to blacklist you. McCarthy was, if you don't have anything nice to say.
Oppenheimer would soon come under suspicion during the Second Red Scare. Oppenheimer's
Yep, you're killing yourself. Okay. Okay. Back to the video.
Oppenheimer's associations with socialist and left-wing political movements and civil liberties organizations in America stretched back to the mid-1930s, when, after being largely apolitical throughout his youth, he began to finally take an interest in political affairs.
Are those little teeth on there like a saw blade? Interesting. Huh.
This led him to join a number of left-wing and progressive movements at a time when socialist parties and organizations were seen as the logical opposition to the growing fascist tide across Europe.
That's beautiful.
Particularly so from 1936 onwards, when the Soviet Union and other communist parties supported the Republicans against the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. It should be noted, however, that Oppenheimer never actually joined the Communist Party of the United States, though a great many individuals who were very close to him were active members, including Jean Tatlock, with whom he was involved romantically from 1936 onwards, his wife Kitty, and his brother Frank. Other movements which Robert was involved in, such as the American Civil Liberties Union, were also considered radical between the 1930s and 1950s, but are now viewed as the torchbearers of the civil rights movement which ended segregation after nearly a century. All of this ensured that Oppenheimer was viewed with some suspicion by the authorities, a development which was compounded by his father's birth in Germany once the United States entered the Second World War.
I think you got to look past all that and look at the service he's done for the country to know that he's not somebody that we suddenly need to be worried about. Like, it was the Red Scare was just such a... It was almost cannibalistic. Everyone turned on each other. And there were hidden communists in America, sure. I won't say there won't. I won't say there won't. Did I just say that? I won't say there wasn't. I'll just edit that last, but you didn't hear that. But it went crazy. Just... Sorry. Okay.
This was a complete oxymoron, as Oppenheimer's Jewish background would have made him a persona non grata to the Nazi regime in Berlin.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, suspicions abounded about Oppenheimer. He was even under surveillance throughout America's involvement in the Second World War, a bizarre period during which he was one of the most senior figures involved in the Manhattan Project. But the FBI simultaneously had a file open on him. These issues coalesced by 1949, and that year Oppenheimer was forced to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee about his political associations. During this, he admitted to ties to the Communist Party, and that many of his more prominent students at Berkeley in the 1930s had also been official members of the party, but stated he had never been a member himself. Not much more came of the interrogation at this juncture, but 4 years later, in the early winter of 1953, the accusations against Oppenheimer were resurrected, and on this occasion, the FBI were convinced, wrongly as it turns out, that Oppenheimer was a Soviet asset operating within the US. Such was the level of paranoia which pertained within America at the time of the Second Red Scare. In mid-December 1953, Oppenheimer's security clearance for the US government was revoked, and he was advised to resign from his government positions. This Oppenheimer refused to do, and demanded a hearing, one which was held behind closed doors in the late spring of 1954. During this, Oppenheimer was completely undermined by his old colleague Edward Teller, who testified that he had found Oppenheimer's behavior questionable at times during his time as director of the Los Alamos laboratory. With this...
Think about what he's got going on. Trying to get an atomic bomb going. All the process, because they had two different kinds. They're working on a third one. All the stuff that's going through this man's mind, and you're just like, yeah, I didn't trust him. Did you say anything at the time? Of course not. You're only saying something now because there's the whole Red Scare, the whole McCarthy, everyone's a communist. Look under your pillow. Ugh. Edward Teller.
betrayal, Oppenheimer was stripped of his security clearance and cast into the political and social wilderness in the mid-1950s.
Jeez.
The years following his security hearing and the revocation of his security clearance were difficult ones for Oppenheimer. The reaction within the academic community was mixed. Most of his colleagues defended Oppenheimer, but the bureaucrats and administrators who ran the American universities were often less sanguine, with many cancelling lectures and appearances which Oppenheimer was scheduled to give. Oppenheimer's own confidence was dented, and he refrained from overt involvement in numerous initiatives launched by figures like Einstein to warn the government and American society about the dangers of excessive nuclear proliferation. Instead, he spent an increasing amount of time away from the continental United States, relocating to the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean, a U.S. overseas territory. Here, he purchased an estate on what was then known as Gibney Beach on the island of St. John, but which has since become known colloquially as Oppenheimer Beach. He spent extended periods here from 1957 onwards, though there were many institutions and organizations within America that continued to invite him to guest lecture. Yet the 1950s were notably lean years for him from a research perspective, during which he barely published anything. By the late 1950s, there were concerted efforts underway to rehabilitate Oppenheimer abroad. For instance, in 1957, the French government awarded him the Légion d'honneur in recognition for his wartime service to the Allied cause. In 1962, he was made a foreign member of the Royal Society in Britain. By that time, there was an increasing awareness at home in America that the Second Red Scare had been utterly excessive in its prosecution of individuals who had been only vaguely associated with the American communist movement and had no real ties of any kind with the Soviet Union. Accordingly, in 1963, President John F. Kennedy moved to rehabilitate Oppenheimer by awarding him the Enrico Fermi Award, an award which had been created in 1956 by the U.S. Department of Energy and named in honor of Enrico Fermi, the Italian-American scientist who had developed the world's first nuclear reactor in Chicago in 1942 as part of the early stages of the Manhattan Project, and who had died prematurely of stomach cancer in 1954. The award had been bestowed on several individuals who had worked at the Los Alamos laboratory under Oppenheimer between 1943 and 1945, including von Neumann, Bethe, and Teller in 1956, 1961, and 1962 respectively. Hence, Oppenheimer's receipt of the award in 1963 was belated but a welcome acknowledgement of the government's mistake in persecuting him as part of the Red Scare. Oppenheimer did not live long to enjoy having his reputation partially restored. 2 years after he was awarded the Fermi Award, he was diagnosed in late 1965 with throat cancer, an illness which was undoubtedly caused by his lifelong chain smoking.
I was just about to say the whole 50s probably hurt him, where he was blackballed. I'm sure he didn't smoke less and take up hobbies like exercising. You know, he seems like somebody who he just gets into this zone. And if the entire 50s everyone's blaming him for communism and they think he's this and they think he's that, he's just tearing himself up inside, chain smoking, not understanding why all of this is happening. So I have to imagine, outside of the chain smoking, he went through a whole decade of being told he's terrible. You know, he's a communist. He's this. His dad was this. He's that. That's gotta. I mean, that doesn't help. That doesn't alleviate pressure. That just makes it worse. And then, at least he got to see his reputation change. But yeah.
This was a time when many forms of cancer which are treatable today were effectively a death sentence. Thus, while Oppenheimer underwent aggressive chemotherapy in an effort to prolong his life, he fell into a coma early in 1967 and died at home in Princeton on the 18th of February. He was 62 years of age. While his reputation had been only partly rehabilitated by the bestowal of the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963, and many political figures continued to view him suspiciously, the academic community clearly demonstrated its respect for Oppenheimer at a funeral service which was attended by over 600 colleagues from within academia, the scientific community, and the military, a great many of whom had worked with Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. His ashes were later deposited in the waters off St. John's Island in the Caribbean in an urn. In the decades since, his reputation has been fully rehabilitated. By way of contrast, Edward Teller, who testified against Oppenheimer at his closed-doors hearing in 1954, was spurned by many within the American scientific community for decades to come. In 1967...
Look, you shit all over someone, it's bound to come back to you. And Teller just shouldn't have.
In 1967, Oppenheimer was posthumously nominated for the third time for the Nobel Prize for Physics. He had previously been nominated in 1946 and 1951, but he had not received the accolade on those occasions, nor did he in 1967. There has been considerable attention given over the years as to why he did not receive the Nobel Prize, given his extensive accomplishments. But there would seem to be clear reasons why he did not. Firstly, Oppenheimer did not publish extensively, unlike someone like Albert Einstein, who published over 300 scientific papers during his lifetime and many books later in his life. By way of contrast, Oppenheimer published just 5 academic papers after the Second World War. Furthermore, while he contributed to numerous fields of inquiry within physics, he did not make the kind of theoretical or applied breakthrough in any one specific area which would have warranted a Nobel Prize. The Nobels are not awarded for a lifetime's work, but generally for a specific scientific accomplishment. Einstein, for instance, won his primarily for his work on the photoelectric effect. Hence, Oppenheimer was deemed not to have warranted a Nobel Prize for his individual contributions to science, though some have speculated that his work on gravitational collapse was worthy of one. His primary accomplishments throughout his career lay in collaborative work and overseeing teams of physicists and other scientists. It was this which made him the ideal individual to head the Los Alamos laboratory during the war. Robert Oppenheimer is one of the most important theoretical physicists in history. His research and work between the 1920s and 1960s added substantially to our understanding of the universe, notably the manner in which the Born-Oppenheimer approximation transformed our understanding of molecular dynamics from 1927 onwards, and how the Oppenheimer-Phillips process allowed for a deuteron-induced nuclear reaction after Oppenheimer and Melba Phillips provided an explanation for this phenomenon in 1935. But he will forever be remembered for his role in the Manhattan Project as director of the Los Alamos Laboratory. In this capacity, Oppenheimer might be said to have been the lead physicist in U.S. efforts to develop an atomic bomb during the Second World War. Whatever the existential and moral implications of the introduction of such weapons into the world might be, there is no doubt that this research was considered necessary in the context of the times. Oppenheimer was clearly troubled by what he and his colleagues had unleashed into the world, and spent much of the post-war period arguing against the development of even more deadly weapons of mass destruction. It was in part owing to this that he found himself persecuted and prosecuted by the government he had worked for in the early 1950s, and cast into the wilderness as a result of the Second Red Scare. His legacy, though, is alive and well today, an eccentric man who viewed the physical universe in mystical terms. Oppenheimer should surely be remembered as one of the great scientists of modern times. What do you think of Robert Oppenheimer? Was he the most significant individual involved in the Manhattan Project? And should he have been awarded a Nobel Prize? Please let us know in the comments section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.
A Nobel Prize. I will say he was running a program with some of the greatest minds at that time. Just wish it could have been under different circumstances for a better cause, like ending homelessness or feeding kids. But I understand why it was done. Yeah, it's just such a... Well, yeah. I don't know what to say. So I'm going to end this here. Like and subscribe. And that was Oppenheimer, Destroyer of Worlds. All right. Well, until next time, have a good day, have a good night.